It is not based on ideology. I know you'd think from listening to the news today that it's based on ideology. I know. It may be changing. But basically, historically, it's been based on compromise. And what this has meant is that people live together who are different. Well, we take for granted things here that don't exist in other places regarding this. And I don't have to go into this at length because if you think about it, you'll all figure it out. Which means that for Americans, it's very easy to have different groups living together. When you transferred to Israel, this thing, it's not so simple as we know. And the differing views of religious versus secularist approaches to Judaism and a variety of groups in between, not only is it true that that model went to Israel, but there comes with that model something else, ideological confrontation, which differs from the American model of ideological compromise. Now, in the particular situation here, there are some worse issues that have to be thrown in. There is a debate that one could talk about for hours between the nature of the Jewish state. What should it be? In fact, the Jewish state is a compromise between two things. A sort of theocracy in which Judaism rules, and a democracy. Now, America is mostly a democracy, although if you ask yourself why a person can't have more than one wife, for example, in the United States, it's because of Christianity. And that's what some of the discussions that go on today about church and state are very bizarre, because what we have in our society is a compromise regarding church and state. It's not all one or all none. And this is obvious for anybody, let's say, goes in the military. The government is paying for chaplains. And it's a compromise. But anyhow, in Israel, the situation is very different because Israel is founded as a Jewish state. And as much as people want to say it's a Western democracy, the reality of the situation is that it exists to advance the interests of the Jewish people, and it does. The big debate is, what are the interests? And the two groups that came from Europe, the secularists and the religious, are faced off against one another as they were faced off, for example, in the Polish parliament during the short period of democracy between World War I and World War II, when you had the Orthodox candidate from Agudah, which was the so-called right wing, and you had the Orthodox, right, so-called modern Mizrachi, which was the religious Zionist, and you also had the secularists in the Bundes, and they were all running for the Polish parliament. And this is the way the society there worked, and this was transferred. And also connected up with this is the question of minority rights in Israel, which, now here's the thing, part of the minority could be the religious Jews. Now, of course, historically, everybody knows that when the state of Israel was established, it was determined that there would be certain religious matters that would be established. And among these, of course, was the right to get yeshiva deferments, which, as we'll say in a few minutes, has turned into a major thing on a scale that no one ever thought of. But here's where we have to get to one of the really big issues regarding Israel. And that is that there are several views regarding the theological nature of the state of Israel. Let us begin from the right. You have the view of Netuei Karta. Netuei Karta means guardians of the city. These are the people that claim they were there for all the ages and never left. They claim to be like the real Jewish inhabitants of Israel. Now, it's not only true that they reject the idea of Zionism and of a Jewish state, believing that it will stop the Messiah from coming, but their view has been married to the view of Rabbi Yoelish, who was the previous Satmar Rebbe, Yoel title now. He died in 1987, and he held the view that the Holocaust was caused by the Zionist heretics. Now you may say, wait a minute, what kind of a nut would believe such a thing? And never mind that he was saved by Zionists. But leave that aside, just a minor problem. The Zionist heretics caused the Holocaust. Now, if you believe that type of thing, you can understand why someone would actually hate the state of Israel. And there is a core group in Israel. Forget, by the way, there's the Netuei Karta of the USA. That's the crazies who went to Ahmadinejad and all that kind of stuff. Forget them. They have nothing. They're not really important in the Israeli scene, and they're just total nuts. However, and they're hated by their own Satmar neighbors because of the things they do. But we're talking now about the real Netuei Karta. You have several hundred families that actually believe that Zionism and the Jewish state caused the Holocaust. When we move to the next group is where we start to get into our problem. So now we move to the group we call Haredim. So the word Haredi used to mean Orthodox, It was invented by the Hungarians, and the OU used to be called Igud HaKehilot HaCharediot B'America, the Organization of Haredi Synagogues of America. However, they had to get rid of it because in the 1970s, 80s, but really it wasn't finished until the 90s, the word was hijacked through the Israeli media for meaning people who are, well, we'd call them ultra-Orthodox, right-wing Orthodox. I don't know what these things mean, but we'll use these terms. I was once sitting in a car going actually to Qumran with some group of people, and there were these two physicists in the front of the car. They're talking about the ultra-Orthodox. I'm sitting in the back with another Dead Sea Scrolls scholar who's also religious, and these guys are describing the ultra-Orthodox. Everything they said about the ultra-Orthodox was us. And it was, okay, so anyhow, I mean, people don't realize what these things mean. Some people think if you eat only kosher food, you're ultra-Orthodox, right? Anyhow, so the point I want to make is that when we get to the so-called Haredim, they're not one group. It's very important to understand this. There are certainly in the party that's called UTJ, United Torah Judaism, there are actually two subsegments. There's Agudah Yisrael, which today is for all intents and purposes, right, the Hasidim, and there's Degel HaTorah, which is the so-called Misnagdim, the opponents of Hasidism, who are today called Litaim, Lithuanians. Very problematical because none of the people come from Lithuania. But worse, the boundaries of Lita, the Jewish word for Lithuania, are not the boundaries of this place called Lithuania, right? So it's very confusing. But leave that aside. They call themselves Litaim in Hebrew, which means Lithuanians. And sometimes you read these funny articles in the newspaper about Lithuanian rabbis have announced this, that, and the other thing. But anyhow, you have to understand something, which is that the Hasidim are pseudo-Zionists because of the importance of messianic redemption. And therefore they tend in things like this to fit more with state-type goals than the so-called Litaim, who come out closer in ideology often to actually, believe it or not, to this Netuei Karta, because they don't really believe that the state has a kind of a religious reality. Now then you get the religious Zionists, who are really now two groups. There's the politically right-wing group centered in the Shtachim, the territories which were conquered in 67. None of this existed before 67. But then there's the old group. They're the bourgeois group, the computer programmers and physicists and bankers and businessmen who are like the modern Orthodox Jews, that we have. So there are really also two groups. And by the way, don't fall into the trap of thinking that the so-called secular Jews are either secular or one group either. Because the so-called secular Jews, most of them have kosher homes. Most of them don't eat things that are forbidden by the Torah. And most of them are interested in Jewish education and stuff like that. And it's just the so-called secular Jews are not really secular, okay? There are different gradations there. There's a small anti-religious group. There's a traditional group on the other side. In the middle, there's the rest of it. But it's not one. There's no one group. Now, the reason I go through all of this is that you need to understand that the people that are involved in much of the extremism that is going on today are primarily based either in the Netuei Karta and its offshoots, or in groups of extremists that have gravitated to similar ideology. Now, I also want to tell you, in the rest of what we're going to be discussing here, I do not want to discuss the one individual who spat on a kid, because I can guarantee you, if you walked around and interviewed people and asked them if they would ever spit on a kid because they didn't think their dress was the right length or they had stockings on, the number of people who would say yes would be about 4. So I don't think that's our real problem. That's just a crazy individual. Or how many men would want their wives to go around with slit, the head covered with 2 slits for their eyes. I think you would find that the number of that is infinitesimally small. So while that would be fun, and it's very easy to stand up here and condemn crazy people like that, I don't think that's what we should be doing the rest of the time that we have today to try and understand what